ordinary heroes in extraordinary times. We travel all over this country, and every single day, I mean, trouble was keeping it as small as the book is. There are so many remarkable stories about kids and adults, about people of every ethnicity and religion who stand up when they don't go looking for trouble, but when it comes to them, they stand up. And we look at what's happened in the last years, and some wonderful examples of that. And we look at moments in history. And as even this trip takes place, I'm on a 70-city tour right now. The person I hold most responsible, who I blame for this, usually he's here, Dennis Moynihan, our tour coordinator, who was our outreach director for a long time, but he had to fly back this morning. I flew here from Cleveland through Houston. I'm not sure why I went through Houston, but he had to fly back to Denver. He's giving a speech tonight, and he'll rejoin us tomorrow night in California. But it's been amazing, this trip. Every single leg of the trip. Yesterday morning in Athens, we broadcast from a higher university, big football town, Scripps School of Journalism, 1,000 students in journalism alone, in Athens, Georgia. And we broadcast from the PBS station, WOUB. All the kids were there to run the cameras and everything, and we broadcast right outside the Roger Ailes newsroom. The news director of Fox is named right there. But these kids were absolutely wonderful. And then we went on to Columbus at noon. And at 4, I spoke at Kent State. I've been wanting to do that for so long. And right afterwards, it was pouring rain. We went outside with Alan Camphora and Chick Camphora. Alan and Chick are brother and sister. Alan was shot at Kent State, 1970, by the National Guard, the 13 seconds that changed the world. Alan was shot through the wrist. His roommate was shot through the foot, lost part of his foot. But they were the lucky ones, because 4 Kent State students were killed. One of them ROTC, who was against the war. And Alan and then Chick was there. She wasn't shot. Just described the whole scene and walked us through where the high mound was, where the police opened fire. I didn't know this. Did you know that the major, what looks like may have called for them to open fire? They're analyzing some tapes now, but the officer in charge, 13 seconds you hear that and you think, oh, is it that little, that short amount of time? All she could say, can you imagine how long that is? And when I thought about it, she said, think about 13 seconds. 1, 2. If you have non-stop fire for 13 seconds, that is a long time. He had to hit them over the head, the National Guardsmen, to stop them from shooting, to stop the shooting. Hitting them over the head with his baton. And how they continue to investigate this to this day, and calling for a truth commission. A truth commission, which is interesting because just the day before, after we had been the day before we were in Athens, we were in Greensboro, North Carolina. And you know what happened there, the Greensboro massacre, where the Klan came out to a protest of people, and they opened fire. And they have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission going. But it's how the past informs the present, and that goes to bigger issues. Should there be an investigation of what happened during the Bush years?
Right.
Yes.
I think we would all agree that was so. So, Amy, I wanted to actually ask about some of the particular stories in your book, because what I found interesting was, for example, the story about the librarians in Connecticut. So here, the last people you consider activists normally are librarians. But these librarians came under attack because of the Patriot Act, right? And the goal was to get these librarians to release the list of what people in Connecticut had been reading, because for some reason the FBI wanted to know this. So when you talk to them to actually write this story as part of the story for the book, you and your brother did this, I got the sense from reading it that these were people that didn't want any kind of publicity or headlines at all.
They are amazing. Are there any librarians in the audience? I could, it's okay if you don't want to admit it. Because I know I'm in a tough crowd if there are librarians here. But this happened a few years ago, and basically it's the story of a group of people you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley if you were violating someone's civil liberties. It's the story of the librarians of Connecticut. So, there's this nonprofit group in Connecticut called the Library Connection, and they're the interconnect, the library internet interconnect of the Central Connecticut libraries. So if you go to the library and you go on the internet, they're running that system. George Christian was the executive director, and he gets a knock at the door, and he answers it. It's two FBI agents, and they hand him an NSL, a national security letter. It's been handed out over 150,000 times, probably well over that. And when you open a letter like this, it's like being exposed to radioactivity. You are not allowed to tell anyone you've seen this. You can't tell your partner, you can't tell family members, you can't tell your boss, you can't tell your coworker. You can tell no one on pain of 5 years in prison. So he's reading this letter. They're standing there. And it's demanding information about people who use the internet at a certain time, a certain day. And he looks up and he says, I believe this is unconstitutional. They look at him pityingly like predators sizing up their prey, and they hand him their cards. They say, you get back to us. So he closes the door, and this brave librarian crumples into his chair. And he thinks, what am I going to do? First of all, he doesn't even know if he can call a lawyer, or if he's breaking the law by calling a lawyer. And that's supposed to have that chilling effect. And he thinks, if I'm going to take on the entire national security state, I need at least 3 other librarians. So he calls the executive committee of the Library Connection. Okay, he calls Peter Chase. He's the library director of the Plainville Library. He'd just been named vice president of the Library Connection. I mean, it's a volunteer job. It's a lofty title for a year of, well, what they told him would be easy. He gets this panic call from George Christian. You need to show up at the offices as quickly as you can. At the office of the Library Connection, do not tell anyone where you're going. You can't tell anyone you've been here or what I said. Please come quickly. Peter Chase. Okay, to describe Peter Chase to you, David and I went to visit him in Plainville, Connecticut. We knew he was the library director because he had that plastic pocket protector. And mild-mannered guy. He's racing to the Library Connection office, and he's thinking, what could be an emergency? Did, someone misfile an adult book in the children's section? So they show up, and the other librarians on this little board show up, and George Christian closes the door. They've got their pro bono lawyer there, and he opens the letter, thus exposing them all. All of them are now silenced. They are gagged. They cannot talk about this. The lawyer runs out. She says, this is way over my head. You got to call the ACLU. So they call the ACLU and they sue the U.S. government. They try to take down the USA Patriot Act. Now, Peter Chase was the head of the Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. He'd been speaking out against the USA Patriot Act for quite a while, debating constantly the U.S. Attorney of Connecticut. And they were sort of like debate partners going around the state. And it's very important because this was the time of the renewal of the USA Patriot Act, and Ashcroft and the Justice Department were saying we are not targeting librarians. Meanwhile, how would you know? Because if you are targeted, if you're handed an NSO, you can't talk about it. They're saying they're not doing this. Of course they are, and the librarians can't speak out. They lose their name. They become John Doe, Connecticut. And the case now goes to the Bridgeport court, and the librarians are thinking they're going to the Bridgeport court. It's their case, and they're told they can't because they're threats to national security. So they can go to the Hartford court a few hours away, and a security guard locks them in a closet. Now, there was no one more surprised than the security guard who said, I've never locked librarians in a closet. But they were put in this tiny room that had a closed-circuit TV, and they were looking out on the Bridgeport